Dark Mouse is a top-down action RPG by indie developer Daniel Wright. It takes a lot of direct inspiration from Dark Souls, but it also builds upon the genre in interesting ways. And right now you might be put off by that simple aesthetic, and so was I at first, but after 16 hours with this game, I'm really glad I stuck with it, because Dark Mouse does a lot with very little. Take that visual aesthetic for example, right? The color scheme is mainly made up of tan, black and greys, which really doesn't allow for a lot of detail to be expressed, but Dark Mouse decides to use this to its advantage. Dark and light become a crucial theme, and the way that line of sight is illuminated around corners adds a haunting, limbo-esque flavor to the game. And this is a developer who understands that gameplay has to come first, so the lighting and the illumination of darkness has gameplay implications, occasionally allowing you a sliver of vision into an adjacent room, or revealing enemies that are lying in ambush, meaning that you have to be ready to fight at a moment's notice. Speaking of which, let's fight against this red-eye knight who is revealed to be resting around the corner in a cave here. He's one of your mouse's doppelgangers found throughout the world, and he mimics the weaponry and the gameplay style that you've built up throughout the game. We both fight with a spiked shield, a curved fire-imbued sword and pyromancy spells, and he quickly overpowers me. The difficulty is no joke, it's easily the most challenging game that I've played all year. The way you control difficulty is through the ghosts that rise alongside you at the bonfire when you die. These shades will follow the path you last took when you died, fighting everything in their way and disappearing when they die, or when they reach the point where you last died, meaning that every time you encounter something in Dark Mouse, you have to do it alone the first time, but then when you die to it, you get these companions who fight alongside you. It's Dark Mouse's major contribution to the Souls genre, and I was surprised that I liked it as much as I did. Fighting with your ghosts felt like fighting with summoned help in Dark Souls, and you can even turn it off if it's making things too easy. But the thing is, it doesn't exactly make things easy. Sometimes this ghost mechanic simply puts you on even footing with the really difficult parts of the game. Together, me and my ghosts corner the Red-Eye Knight. We're whittling away at his health until I am the only one who remains. I dodge every attack, I set up for the final blow, and I die. Yeah, it's tough. Honestly, I think some parts of the difficulty even need to be toned down, it's that tough. For example, towards the end of the game, there's this gauntlet where you fight a multitude of enemy mice. These were so difficult that I absolutely needed my shades to fight alongside me, which was a good example of when the game felt almost too hard, because I was actually dying so I could get shades to help me, and this felt mandatory. Needing to die to get help is a pretty shitty situation, but that said, I did go most of the game without feeling this way, so for the most part, the ghost mechanic works pretty well. But let's take a step back, I'm getting too far ahead. You have your standard Souls control scheme, you have your light attacks, your heavy attacks, your block, and your dodge. Shield in your left hand, sword, pyromancy, or bow in your right, and access to an inventory where you heal, upgrade weapons, and equip more armor. The health bar is in the top left, but the stamina bar is actually the light bar in the center of the screen, which I like. It highlights just how important stamina management is in this game. The Souls-style combat is translated really well to top-down, rewarding well-timed blocks and parries, and punishing overly aggressive, reckless play. One of the coolest additions is the abilities screen, where you can regularly invest talent points that unlock new moves. And it's clever because if you had all of these unlocked moves from the very start, then it would be way too complicated and confusing. As it stands though, you can use this abilities screen to unlock abilities related to the situation you're in. So if you're getting shot at with arrows, you can deflect those arrows with the appropriate ability. If you're fighting against these little spiders that keep their distance and only attack you when your back is turned, then you can get the dash attack and run at them and kill them before they can back away. with the ability system you actively feel your character getting more powerful, and I like it. As you progress through the game, you find Marrow, which is used to invest in your stats at the bonfire. Health, stamina, weight capacity, resilience to stun locking, and dexterity to increase your attack speed. These are all stats that you can invest in. But an odd choice is the ability to level up your proficiency with certain weapon classes here, which I suppose is an easier to understand version of the strength and dexterity system of Dark Souls, but the drawback here is that it has the unwanted side effect of forcing a player to choose one class of weapon that they'll have to stick with. So this, coupled with the lack of variety of weapons in the early game, will likely frustrate a lot of players as they invest in the wrong weapons, or they'll end up wishing that they could switch those stats they invested in later on. If you do want to play this game, I've left a link in the description to a short written guide to the weapons and mechanics, which I recommend you check out if you're having trouble or you don't want to go in totally blind. It stops you making those investment mistakes. Combat, like Souls, largely revolves around learning enemy patterns and predicting their attacks. Most enemies have these patterns of behavior, which means that once you figure them out, they're much easier to take out. Some of the most fun I had is in these rooms full of ranged enemies, where taking out the enemies in the right order almost felt like a sort of puzzle, not to mention all the traps in some levels. This one castle is like Sen's Fortress on steroids. So Dark Mouse felt a lot like Hotline Miami, if you've played that game, where you find yourself mapping out the best way to deal with certain rooms full of enemies and traps. And then you would execute that strategy. You would do it over and over, tweaking it slightly each time until you found the perfect way to make your way through a room. I'd sort of lost that feeling in Souls, to be honest, but I enjoyed it in Dark Mouse. And it's actually very, very difficult to run past everything and just rest at the next checkpoint, which is a common problem in Souls games. Most enemies in Dark Mouse can match or even exceed the speed that you run, which really makes it difficult to run past stuff. Not to mention, they follow you a ridiculous distance, and you can't rest at bonfires until you've killed them all. So this results in you often being really low on health, and creeping forward slowly, just hoping to see a bonfire enter the edge of your screen. Bonfires are placed really close together in this game, but I assume that's partly to do with the difficulty, and also because your ability to heal in Dark Mouse is quite limited. Random enemies drop morsels, which act as your healing, and you'll have a good store of them in the early game, but by the late game, a morsel is like finding a divine blessing in Dark Souls. You only want to use them when you really need to. And in the version I played, you couldn't even heal in combat, but the developer's always posting on the Steam page, and he says that now there's a designated button for healing, which is great. But because morsels drop so infrequently, your health is a premium that you want to preserve at all times. And because health is so important, this inevitably leads to you letting your ghosts do as much of the fighting as possible when you get to a really tough part. And generally, this was only a problem in the late game, where I started to have a really hard time and I started to rely on my ghosts a lot more. But the thing is, you don't want to ever really be relying on your ghosts to do all the fighting for you. That feels really bad. So in the future I'd kind of like to see more plentiful healing, along with slightly weaker ghosts, so it just increases that level of player agency that you have. Moving on, you definitely don't feel alone in Dark Mouse, even though it's single player. There are 2 escort quests I'm aware of. There's one escort quest I'm really a big fan of. The character has her traits reinforced by her reactions to enemies, and she has this story that really drives the narrative of the game, and you start to care about this character more because she's helping you, and characters that help you in terms of gameplay are characters you'll end up empathizing more with. I think that makes sense, right? The other escort had a tendency to get lost behind me and kept dying to traps. Plus, he required me to invest a morsel, a bit of my healing in him, to keep him going. So I was getting punished pretty hard for this guy's bad reaction to all the traps. So I guess you could argue that this was in keeping with his character, since he was meant to be a weak warrior that you're dragging along with you, but I ended up getting pretty frustrated with him, no matter how in keeping with his character that is. But yeah, you never feel alone. Ghosts fill the rooms that you're having trouble with, and at random intervals, this happens. A powerful hunter will appear, rush you down, and kill you, then feed on your marrow. If you die to him, your maximum health is halved, and it will slowly come back over time. Now, in a game this hard, this is actually terrifying. From Software have been trying to figure out how to make invaders scary for a while now. In Dark Souls 2, for example, they had them invade at random intervals. But Dark Mouse actually gets it right by making invaders have the opportunity to reduce your health by half when they find you and successfully hunt you down. You actually are pretty scared of having half your health reduced, so I do find it pretty funny that this indie game got that right. They make hunters and invaders pretty scary. But back to what I said at the start, this game does a lot with a little. The music is really on point, and a lot of the ambient music was even great enough for me to put in this video, for example. The boss tracks, though, that's the thing I love the most. A lot of the boss music actually matches the movement of the boss, which makes the tracks really memorable. One thing I also loved was that the boss music persists after you die to the boss, and I think this says that the game developer really knows that players will throw themselves at a boss over and over again. It's great. The thumping beat of the music keeps you hyped, and it continually reminds you of what your goal is and which boss you're facing, and it's much more engaging. I liked it. It's all about those little things. Dark Mouse even uses camera zooms to great effect, narrowing your camera in tight sections, and expanding it when you're exploring a vast plain. Exploration is a big part of Dark Mouse too. You hug the walls, and eventually you'll find little optional paths that hide treasures like marrow and weapons and amulets. Also, you have a torch, which restricts your ability to explore new areas if it runs out. However, mine never really ran out unless I was writing this script and I had paused the game, so... A lot of the time, exploring felt like an early Zelda game, in the sense that you're constantly pulling out your map and figuring out where you are and which rooms you haven't explored yet. I loved that, but I really wish my map would stop deleting the old areas that I'd already explored. It made exploring one castle a huge pain in the ass because rooms I'd already explored would go dark on my map. In closing, I do think that Dark Mouse is a really great achievement as an indie game. It brings out some of the best elements that Dark Souls pioneered, and it even pioneers some new mechanics of its own. As time goes on, I realize that's what's going to make a Souls-like game stand out from the rest. It's coming up with a new mechanic like the ghost system, and inserting it and seeing how it really changes the Souls mechanics, and seeing how that Souls experience can be emphasized and brought out in different ways, and I think that Dark Mouse nails it. It still needs polish in some areas, and you'll get frustrated at some points when you play it, but it's easily worth the $10 price, and it's easily worth sticking it through and getting through the frustrating bits because there are a lot of great moments in this game. Plus, this is actually the first Souls-like game I've covered that's actually available for purchase, so go get it if you're interested, and bear in mind that if I was more critical in this video, it's because the game is out, and your money is on the line, and this is more of a review than a preview. So, if you're currently craving Dark Souls 3, I reckon this is the best thing to tide you over until then. And I also did a little Patreon playthrough for this game, so if that sort of thing interests you, you can become a $5 patron and see that stuff in the future. So, yeah. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.